it is a dilemma between either using the Russian funds which are available and which are on the accounts in the West, or facing a very likely prospect of seeing Russia on the doorsteps of the NATO in not so distant future.
The Kremlin understands the threat, and that is why they are already looking for highly professional lawyers in the West who are ready to appeal and defend their assets with a lot of money. The funds that are now blocked in the accounts of European and American banks could become a serious financial assistance to Ukraine.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center, an NGO Euro-Atlantic course, and I'm your host, Myroslava Yaremkiv. Hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian state assets frozen in the West after the full-scale invasion began could potentially aid Ukraine. These efforts received a new boost from the United States after the Biden administration proposed to the G7 to approve a strategy to transfer these assets to Ukraine. Despite the opposition of some countries, the situation is now quite favorable for making progress in this area. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the feasibility of transferring confiscated Russian assets to Ukraine, exploring the methods, risks, and challenges tied to this political decision. If you want to learn more about this subject, please continue watching this video and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our videos in the future. The urgency of the confiscation issue was added by delays in approving large aid packages for Ukraine in the US and the EU, which forced Ukraine's allies to look more closely at other sources of support for Ukraine apart from taxpayer funds of their countries. Founding partner of FinPoint investment advisor Serhiy Budkin will talk more about other political reasons that prompted the reopening of this question.
In Ukraine, the war is consuming everything. It is consuming people, it is consuming whatever amount of armaments are and can be sent by the West to the country, and it consumes money in enormous quantities. The Ukrainian Ministry of Finance projects that in 2024, the budget shortfall will be about 45%, or roughly $41 billion. This is a great sum of money for a relatively small country, of relatively small economy rather, of a large country like Ukraine. And so far, this shortfall had been covered by the West and by the provision of either grants or soft loans by the Western countries to Ukraine. 2024 is also a very interesting year in the sense that it looks like half of the world is going to the polling booths. Over 50 countries and about 2.5 billion people will be voting in 2024. And elections will be held everywhere from, Taiwan to Moldova and from Austria to the United States. The problem for Ukraine in that respect is the fact that it's very likely that at the end of 2024, we'll see a totally different political landscape. The rise of political populism and isolationism makes it very likely that in many countries, in the European Union, there will be a substantial change in power. From Austria, where Austrian Freedom Party is very likely to become the winner of the elections, to Portugal, in Europe at large, and most importantly in the United States, where the ascension of Mr. Donald Trump and his chances to become the next president of the United States are getting higher and higher with every day past. This makes the issue of funding Ukraine ever more pressing, and the resolution of that shall be found. And hence, the recently discussions about the use of frozen Russian funds by the West to support Ukraine have entered its active phase, which probably we have never seen since the start of the war. Overall, in the West has frozen about $330 billion of Russian money, mostly in the European Union and the United States. And so far, these assets have not been used to support Ukraine, mostly because of a great aversion of the West to the idea of using assets of a sovereign country by another sovereign country without an explicit permission by the former. Now, however, the dilemma for the Western world seems to be very acute. I mean, it is a dilemma between either using the Russian funds which are available and which are on the accounts in the West, or facing a very likely prospect of seeing Russia on the doorsteps of the NATO in not so distant future, maybe even testing Article 5 in the process. And this alternative is pretty brutal, if I may say so. There is obviously another alternative, using of the Western taxpayers' money to continue supporting Ukraine, but this alternative seems to be less and less palatable for the West. And given the change in political landscape, it is very likely that by the end of the year, it will actually become totally unpalatable and totally closed for Ukraine. Therefore, I believe that whatever happens this year, there will be a solution. The European Union, first of all, the European Union will find the possibility to use that money to support Ukraine. The whole amount, which is frozen in the West, is more than enough to support the humanitarian part of the Ukrainian budget for many years to come. And I don't know what will be the legal grounds for using that money, whether it will be something which is promoted by the famous economist Timothy Ash, using that money as a collateral for a program of soft loans by the European banking system to the Ukrainian economy, or any other mechanism, but the mechanism will be found, because the alternative is too dire to dare to think about it.
Russia plans to challenge any steps taken by the US and the EU to confiscate $300 billion of frozen central bank assets in favor of Ukraine. The Central Bank of Russia is negotiating with international law firms to represent its interests in the event of a lawsuit. The Russian authorities also ordered an expert examination with an analysis of relevant legislation abroad and precedents in other countries. This only means that Russia is frightened, because the possibility of this happening is getting more and more real. More on that, please welcome Yaroslav Sydorovych from the European Cooperation Agency.
More than 100 Russian billionaires keep getting richer by an average of 25% in 2022 and 2023, due to being close to the Kremlin and having relative orders. And one must understand that the population supports Putin's policy. Waging war is economically beneficial to many in Russia. The forces of Ukraine and Russia are unequal in terms of their own resources. The courage of Ukrainians and the resilience of the armed forces of Ukraine didn't allow the Kremlin to seize Ukraine in 3, 7, or however many days. Volunteers and Western countries helped also strengthen our armed forces, which hold defences and liberate temporarily occupied territories. But more powerful actions are needed to exhaust Russia. We are optimistic that Bill 4175/2003, which is now in the US Parliament, will be passed. The Kremlin understands the threat, and that is why they are already looking for highly professional lawyers in the West who are ready to appeal and defend their assets with a lot of money. Many argue that there is no need to hurry with the confiscation. The war will end and reparations from Russia will be carried out because the war will end. In fact, it is an illusion. The illusion is that expropriation cannot be carried out in democratic countries. The power of law is paramount. So there must be laws, there must be court proceedings. And this is very important. Of course, the US and many other countries have a way to confiscate some assets, but they are limited to certain actions, particularly the actions of sanctioned persons, fraudulent actions, and money laundering. In conclusion, I would like to say that confiscation of assets is not only a question of compensation for losses. An effective tool of financial responsibility of the aggressor should be created now, and not in terms of hundreds of years, as happened after World War I and World War II. If Russia is returned to the EU market and Russia agrees to pay a certain percentage of reparations for the losses incurred by Ukraine, it will not be 30 years. According to simple mathematical calculations, it can last 100, 200, and even 400 years. Therefore, to hope for voluntariness is to be naive. It is necessary to act actively and ensure justice, because the financial responsibility of the aggressor country should be similar to how a criminal is financially charged in criminal proceedings, when the tools of the criminals, crimes, are confiscated. And the budget, the National Welfare Fund, are resources. They are tools of the aggressor country, the terrorist country, to commit crimes on the territory of Ukraine.
And last but not least, let's hear from public activist Igor Stokoz, who will share his insights on the possibility of transferring frozen Russian assets to Ukraine and the risks entailed with this decision.
Is it possible to send Russian confiscated assets to Ukraine? Today, many political actors, very serious American and European politicians, are concerned about this question. This issue is also very important for Ukraine, especially against the background of decreasing financial aid to Ukraine, and not only financial. The funds that are now blocked in the accounts of European and American banks could become a serious financial assistance to Ukraine in solving both its issues of providing weapons and solving some internal problems like social security, pension, etc. Very recently, almost today, the news has come that the US Congress preliminary came to an agreement on blocking and the possibility of transferring $300 billion of Russian funds to Ukraine, but US lawmakers and authorities have some questions about the risk this decision may entail. First of all, the so-called cash outflow. This means that for many of the world's autocratic regimes, which today keep money in the US currency, this may signal that US banks are not reliable and therefore is a threat to unionization. Thus, a decision may be made to keep assets in yuans in Chinese banks. And this, in turn, will involve the creation of a gap between the dollar and the yuan, and consequently, the US economy may suffer. Similar fears exist in a number of European countries. We shouldn't think that all European countries will unanimously accept and support this idea, but the very fact that there is a bipartisan support for this project, this memorandum which has been signed today, by the way, shows that our Western partners have begun to seriously consider the possibility of giving Ukraine transferring confiscated Russian assets. Most likely, it'll be done in such a way that not all the funds in America will be frozen. Some parts will be transferred by the US government and some part by the European governments. But it's too early to talk about it because it is a difficult, painstaking and very important work. And because behind this decision, there is also an issue of legislative regulation, how to transfer funds so that Russia does not bombard Western countries with their lawsuits later. Today, we can say that there is such a possibility. Let's hope that both European and American partners will come to such a decision and these funds will be transferred to Ukraine as they are absolutely necessary to stop the Russian invasion, to prevent Ukraine from being exhausted in the war. Because according to all signs, it becomes clear that Putin has chosen a strategy of a long-term war, a war of attrition, hoping that Ukraine will not be able to continue resisting.
You've been watching a special project by Ukraine Media Center and Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine in Flames. In the description under this video, you can find information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video. Slava Ukraini!